constitute their church as a real force in their own society. So the people in Russia, in Ukraine, and Belarus were an invisible church. And I say to you that we too are an invisible church here. We are distinct, we Orthodox laity, in very many ways. And how many of us know our distinctions? I studied for a summer at the Immigration History Research Center at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And there were scholars there who were researching various ethnic and religious groups in the United States. How many of you knew that Greek Orthodox women are the most educated of any distinct ethnic group in the United States? They are empowered with their education. How many of you knew that? How many of you knew that the social relationships among Greek Americans in a family are strongest among same-sex siblings? In other words, sister with sister and brother with brother. Those bonds distinguish this community to which you belong. So the women in your church are empowered above ethnic women in any other ethnic group, Jewish, Slavic, of any group, take your choice. They are more empowered with education than any other. How many of you knew that? How many of you knew of the political empowerment of Slavic Orthodox people in the United States, who are virtually responsible for the United Mine Workers Union, who are virtually responsible for the social cataclysms that affected our country in labor in Pennsylvania and in New York in the 1930s and early in the 1940s. Slavic peoples were extremely politically active. We too, you see, we Orthodox people are invisible. We are known to others here in the United States primarily through our hierarchs, who, not in themselves, not through intention, but through the way in which they are received socially, culturally, politically among us, are seen as but a colorful veneer of who we are, a peculiarly and colorfully dressed people who somehow embody in the media us, the children whom no one ever sees. So we are an invisible flock, and you in your organization are beginning to raise your voice, to make yourselves heard. And that leads to the second likeness between us and that awakening church in the USSR. This invisible flock has unknown needs. In Russia, the priests are just beginning to know the needs of these vast numbers of laity who are now suffusing their churches. They are just realizing now that they have ministered for 75 years to an image of the past. What they have now are concrete people with real needs. For 75 years, priests in Russia were trained essentially to minister to pre-revolutionary peasants. And of course, the government in the Soviet Union liked it that way. Not only that, but some priests liked it that way. Some priests in their 40s and in their 50s said to me, I miss the old days when we had persecution and we had old ladies to deal with, because they respected us and they listened to us. You see, I miss those days. These young people that come to us now in such great numbers, they said almost with regret, you see. These young people are not really spiritual like these old people. And yet these young people who I came to know through my ministry were full of the Spirit, full of the Spirit. They were aware of their spiritual hunger, and there is no person more honest than at that moment when he or she recognizes those spiritual needs. Of course these priests liked the old ladies because they were easier to serve in many, many ways. If you stood at the right spot in front of the iconostas, they were happy, right? If you said the right imprecation with the right pronunciation of a language which they did not understand, they were content. These old people want, these young people want service. They want to be fed. They want ministry. And these priests are beset, you see, with the demands that they now face. In the USA also, I would say to you that we too have been guilty of ministering to the image of grandparents who often are no more. That our ministry is designed for people who now lie in the cemetery. It is unfortunate that many of those older customs, the matanyas, the local prayers, the priesthood within the family are lost to us. But what we minister to in many of our parishes, I don't say in all of them, but in many of our parishes, is a phantom culture If we want that culture, we must realize it among us. If we want a form, you see, of Orthodox observance, of family ministry, we must realize it now, acknowledging our own needs, acknowledging our own culture, and they're doing it in some places, like Boca Raton, Florida. Right? There are places where they are realizing this family ministry among us. We must bring to light in our own lives that which lived in theirs, in the lives of those people who lie in the cemetery. We must not pretend. We must not pretend. And under pretense act as if that culture is still alive among us, because it is not. It is not. It is not. When I go to homes to bless them, you see, for the new year, I don't see the icons gathered in the corner of one room as they were in the old days. I don't see people living their lives according to forms of Orthodox piety. I see people coming to church and expecting the priest to live that model for them. You see, if we wish this model to be among us, we must realize it among ourselves. So the needs of the youth in the USSR are largely unmet. And the priests, the hierarchy in the USSR, have been up till now almost deaf to those needs. We too have unique needs, and we must raise them up before our priests, before our bishops, in this time of crisis, of real crisis. I've worked with youth in the USSR. When I go to the USSR or to Russia or to Ukraine and I'm working with young people, I feel fulfilled. I get enough steam, spiritual energy to come home and work among our own kids who are spiritually in a state of torpor, of near death. The kids in my classroom in the United States know less of religion than these who have been raised for 70 through 75 years of atheism. Our youth are slipping away through our fingers. In many of our parishes, we must wake up and realize what is happening to us. We are becoming a remnant, a place to which theology classes come. And we are like a living diorama, so they can look upon the way things used to be, and sometimes we like that role. Sometimes we are far too comfortable with it. We are not mummies, you see, in a museum. We are people living within a culture. And that is how we must constitute ourselves as a church. In Russia, the very models of leadership are born not organically within the church and serving its needs, but imposed from outside by political forces. In Russia and in Ukraine and in Belarus, the church has been bureaucratized into the Soviet model. Decisions are made from the top down, and they have been controlled up till now, perhaps even now, by government structures. They've been controlled by government structures in the USSR. This is a church which has been Sovieticized. You see, there's a word in Russian that expresses that very aptly in its organization. Stalin, when he suffered the church to exist once more in the 1940s, found only 3 bishops who were still out of jail. All of the bishops that we have around us are essentially products of this intimidated Soviet form with decisions made from the top down. In our own church, we have the American political model, which we would expect to be democratized, but for us it is not. Because our priests are ethnarchs who can be used politically. Our hierarchy are embodiments of a political force, you see, those people whom they represent, who can, in their persons, you see, be treated as representatives of us. So then, far different from a democratic model, we have been made, as a matter of fact, into a model of despotism, you see. And we've been made into that model, not through the natural desires, you see, of these hierarchs who move us, but through the political forces within which they work and within which they operate. In Russia and the US, the church is presented to the culture as an entity ruled by these hierarchs who are received by all as the not representatives of the church, but virtually as its embodiment. So that hierarchical veneer of the church structure has been mistaken by the culture itself, both here and there, as a substitute for the church itself. The needs of the church are lost in the process as if the people existed, as if we existed merely to sustain the structure. The need is to find those voices in the church which inspire us and empower them. That's what's done in Russia. If people have a bishop who inspires them, the people flock to that diocese. They rush to hear him speak. They want to know every word that falls from his lips. They empower those who inspire. And it is a process, you see, of selection, and a selection that is guided by the Spirit. When that happens, it is a miracle to behold. We must allow ourselves to be enthused, to be inspired, to be directed, led spiritually by those who meet our needs. Finally, we must find the models for which the people long. The models. There are models of obedience in Russia that are very, very strong within that culture. Obedience. Berdyaev, one of the great Russian philosophers, recognized this. And in his own writing and in the Russian and the writing of many Orthodox philosophers who were emigres, we find this theme, that God does not wish from us obedience first, rather God wishes from us our creativity. God demands from us our creativity, but we in our weakness act as if he wants our obedience. If you look at Dostoevsky, he is the most demonic of figures who rely upon that blind obedience within the church in Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor. Of course, we obey, but we obey in order to be creative. Of course, in times of crisis, authoritarian models are the ones we long for. Of course, the church does have authority, especially now in this very relativistic world, when our universities here are suffused with models of interpretation that are utterly relativistic. And I don't think our parents realize this. When we send our kids to American universities, we are sending them there to be deprogrammed. You see, that's how the faculty views the affliction of this tradition which they bear. Of course, our church has authority, but that authority is sustained within dialogic models. And this is an age in which we must turn to those dialogic models that are embedded within the church. Russia herself longs for democracy. The models which she wishes for herself are dialogic ones. If you want to know where those dialogic models reside in the church, look to the structure of the liturgy itself. The liturgy itself which binds us. The voice of priests and the voice of the laity, embodied in the choir, so unfortunately alone in many of our parishes, you see. That ghostly voice that rises from behind us. That's your voice, you see. That's your voice. And that is the dialogic voice that sustains the structure of that liturgy. It is a dialogue, a divine dialogue of priest and people, of the book and the response, of the word and its inspiration. Dialogic models serve our church, and they serve it very well. The secular models of order around us are ones of reform, and they are ones which empower individuals. People are conceived in this model to be individuals. Individuals empowered by virtue of their rights. Individuals are those people who are distinct and separate from all others. We are a culture of individualism. As Orthodox, we must recognize that we are not individuals born only of our rights. We are persons born of our relationships and of our responsibilities to each other. We are persons. And the human model as one of personhood rather than individuality is one of the great gifts this Orthodox culture can give the world in which we live. This model of personhood is one which has been sustained among Greeks and the Greek Academy and the Greek American Academy for these last 75 years while it was suppressed in Russia. And it is time, indeed, to raise it up again. I repeat, we are not individuals born only of our rights, but we are persons born of our relationships. We, each of us, relate to each other. As a priest, I relate to those whom I serve, and those whom I serve relate to me. We define each other. As a father, I relate to my children, and I am shaped by them, even as I shape them. As a husband, I relate to the person whom I love, the wife whom I love. And the two of us, through the process of our marriage, shape each other. One of us does not shape the other alone. We shape each other. And if you want the most drastic model of what personhood means, remember yourself, your own state of grief the last time you lost someone whom you loved to death. You realize at that moment that it is not another individual who has died separate from you, but that in that death you have indeed lost a part of your very self. We are persons who shape each other. The divine dialogue of that personhood provides its paradigm in the Holy Trinity, and Russian thought develops this model very, very extensively. The Holy Trinity. God alone, Father Hopko says, is not God. God in God's self is a divine dialogue, Father, Son, and Spirit, three persons constituted in their oneness through the perfection of their love. In that model, in this Trinitarian church, rests the inspiring vision, the sustaining vision of this personhood that we offer to this culture, divided so dramatically, so radically from its very self, so that we wonder how it can survive. Our voice must be raised, our needs must be heard. And as a historian, what a terrible irony. What a terrible irony that in the Middle Ages, the era of such profound political despotism, the time of Ivan the Terrible, the church itself, in its structure, was far more democratic than it is today, either in the United States or in the USSR. We have had these models of despotism, of authoritarian structure imposed upon us by social situations which are no longer valid. That moment after the coup, when Russia rejected the party, it invalidated in a second the teeming collections of Soviet studies throughout the United States. If you walk through aisles now in the Soviet study centers of Columbia, Harvard, and Stanford, you see books of the dead, rows of Lenin, rows of Marx. We devoted ourselves in our intellectual structures, in our governmental structures, in our intelligence structures, to tracing these people who literally are no more. Those who invented the term, the trash heap of history, themselves now lie there trashed, you see. And it is this voice of this church which rises up as a creative power, a creative democratic power, a power for democracy in that society. And we too, if we are to raise these dialogic models, if we are to offer our culture these Orthodox models for which it hungers, and with which it needs to be inspired, we must do it. We cannot rely upon anyone else to do it for us. Our priests don't live Orthodox models for us. We live Orthodoxy. And if there is to be a dialogic model in this church, there must be a voice, a strong voice, which will be empowered by its being raised. And this voice is a hungry voice. This voice that is raised is not one which raises itself in challenge. It's not one that raises itself in arrogance. It's one that raises itself defined by its needs and following a hierarchy, a bishop who will respond to it, So your voice is a seductive call to bishops who themselves, I suspect, are very hungry for real, concrete flocks embedded in this culture whom they can effectively lead. So the greatest gift for the church is a decisive voice, as it has been in Russia, articulating our needs and asking for inspiration. America is in a spiritual crisis no less acute than that of Russia itself. When I come back home and I see the caricature upon our screen of what's going on in Russia, I am appalled, because we act as if Russia itself has been spiritually hungry, and now isn't it wonderful that they can express this religious freedom? What about our own spiritual hunger? What about the kids that I teach in my classes, some of them Orthodox, who have a Mickey Mouse vision, a Disney World vision of what the church is and what it represents, who view the church as some place they go when they go home to be with their parents, who don't view the church as theirs, but something which belongs to somebody else who may be related to them. People for whom the church is a function of ethnic recipes. People for whom the church is indeed dead, absent, gone from their lives. These are the kids I teach. This is the culture in which we live. These are the needs to which we ourselves must respond. We are a people who raise our voice because we need inspiration. We need inspiration. And we stand at a moment at which we hope and we pray we can receive it. Thank you.
I think that Father really started us off on the right. There's so much there for us to digest, but I think he put together for us the thoughts that many of us have had over the years, and now that has brought us together. Father, you will be available for question and participation as we proceed. I'm going to turn over the mic shortly to George Carcazes, who will begin a discussion about some of the issues that I mentioned earlier. And I think we have a context now in which to address them. I'm just reminded by one item that I saw in some ecumenical digest some time ago, and I thought maybe it represents the spirit that prevails or impels us. It said, unity through conformity is tyranny. Unity through diversity is a gift of the Holy Spirit. With that, George, will you come up and begin?
Frankly, I was hoping that there would be a break, because I don't know how anybody could follow Father. I am reminded of the story of the two Catholic cardinals and the OCL member who died, and all arrived at the pearly gates at the same time. And St. Peter admitted them and said, you know, God is very busy, but always allow everybody who comes up here one question. And the Italian cardinal asked God whether there would be another Italian pope. And God assured him that there would be sometime in the future. The Polish cardinal said, well, you know, we've only had one Polish pope, but can you assure me that there will be another Polish pope? And he said yes. The OCL board member asked God whether the laity and the clergy would ever have a right to vote for their hierarchy. And God thought for a long time, and he said, well, I'm sure that that will happen, but probably not during my lifetime. The subject of the election of the hierarchy has been catapulted because of recent events. We were supposed to be in a workshop, and I think that they buried that as number 5 on the list. I don't know how Steve selected the order in which these topics were presented, but I think that he was trying to put the election of hierarchy someplace in the middle. If you put it on the top, it's too much attention. If you put it on the bottom, maybe people will infer something from that. So he had it someplace in the middle, and was perhaps subconsciously hoping that it wouldn't attract too much attention. But suddenly, with the passing of the patriarch in Constantinople and the election of the new patriarch, the topic became very important or at least timely, and so I was asked to start off the meeting with this topic. I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to read the paper that was prepared, and I won't go through that. I think what we really want to do is we would like to generate as much dialogue as we can. Obviously, there have been a lot of reports in the newspapers, and a lot of people are shocked to discover that the Turkish government had so much to say about who could be the patriarch, and perhaps other governments behind the scenes might have some influence over the selection of the patriarch. It was informative for me. Dr. Copan sent me an article from the 1911 issue of the Encyclopedia Britannica that set forth what the procedure was for the election of the ecumenical patriarch in 1911. And at that particular time, the procedure was that all of the various Orthodox Christians who found themselves in Constantinople at the time of the death or the transfer of patriarchs met together, and many representatives of the laity, even representatives of trade unions and trades and so on and so forth, participated along with the clergy and the bishops in drafting a list of people that would be voted upon eventually. So there was a lot of lay participation in the selection of this list, and a list of 15 was eventually selected, and that was then submitted to the Sultan. And the Sultan had the right to remove 3 names. And then the remaining names, the 12 remaining names, were brought back, and the metropolitans voted in church for one of those out of the 12. My understanding of the procedure as it was followed just recently in the last week or two is that the members of the Holy Synod alone prepare a list of those who are eligible. And under Turkish law, those who are eligible are only Turkish citizens living in Turkey at that time. That list is then submitted to the governor of Istanbul, and he has the right to return from the list, 10, 12, whatever it is. He returns 3 names that are acceptable to him, and then the Holy Synod votes on one of those 3. And then there was all sorts of press reports that this procedure was not followed when Athenagoras was elected because of pressure from the U.S. State Department that permitted Athenagoras to be elected by the Holy Synod, even though he was not a Turkish citizen and he was not living in Turkey. But in any event, it certainly shows us that we do not have the right at the present time to select, or the laity certainly don't have any input at all into the selection of the patriarch, much less the selection of our hierarchs here in the United States. I'd like to just mention that now in the papers, those of you who have read it, you'll see that we went, and Leon Marinakos is primarily responsible for writing this paper, and he's not here. But we went through the various apostolic and traditional and historic authorities that established the right of the laity to participate in the selection of their hierarchs, and also the historical reasons why this was eventually taken away. And I think, in a word, what you see from this is the improper influences of secular powers and governments that, in order to remove these, what came to be what started out as the right of the laity to participate in this